tone that suggested that thinking about it was really just a formality. The decision had already been made by everyone except Cherry herself. Cherry went to her room and closed the door, leaning against it as she tried to process what had just happened. Her parents wanted her to marry David to save their reputation. David was willing to marry her because she was a suitable wife who would help him move on from Jane. And she was expected to go along with this arrangement because it was what was best for everyone. The cruel irony was that this was everything she had ever wanted and nothing she had ever wanted at the same time. She had dreamed of marrying David, but she had imagined him proposing because he loved her, not because it was socially convenient. She had fantasized about him choosing her over Jane, not settling for her because Jane was no longer available. But what choice did she really have? She was 23 years old with no real prospects. She had spent her entire life being the reliable daughter, the one who solved problems and made sacrifices for the family. She had never been the kind of person who put her own needs first or demanded that others consider her feelings. And there was a part of her that hoped that maybe, just maybe, this could work out. Maybe David would learn to love her if they were married. Maybe he would see her good qualities and realize that she was worth loving for her own sake, not just as a replacement for someone else. Maybe this marriage of convenience could become something real and meaningful over time. 3 days later, David came to the house to have the conversation that would seal her fate. He asked to speak with her privately, and they went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was a beautiful spring evening, the kind of night that should have been romantic, but instead felt like a business meeting. "I'm sure your parents have talked to you about the possibility of us getting married," David said, not looking at her as they walked. "Yes, they have," Cherry replied. "I want you to know that I think very highly of you, Cherry. You're a good person, and I believe you would make an excellent wife. I know this isn't the most romantic proposal, but I think we could have a good life together." Cherry wanted to ask him if he loved her, but she was afraid of the answer. She wanted to ask him if he would ever be able to forget about Jane, but she knew that was unfair. She wanted to ask him to wait, to give him time to see if real feelings could develop between them, but she knew that the pressure from both families was too strong. "I care about you too, David," she said, which was true, even if it wasn't the whole truth. "So you'll marry me?" he asked, finally looking at her. Cherry looked into his brown eyes and saw kindness there, but not love. She saw respect, but not passion. She saw a man who was trying to do the right thing, but not a man who was excited about spending the rest of his life with her. "Yes," she said, because it was the only answer that made sense given everything that had led to this moment. David smiled, and for a moment, Cherry allowed herself to believe that this was the beginning of something beautiful. He took her hand and squeezed it gently, and she felt a flutter of hope in her chest. "I promise I'll be a good husband to you, Cherry," he said. "I'll take care of you and respect you." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something. Cherry told herself that it was enough, that many marriages had started with less and grown into something wonderful. She told herself that she was lucky to be marrying a man who was kind and decent, even if he didn't love her the way she loved him. The engagement was announced 2 weeks later, and the reaction was exactly what her parents had hoped for. The community was pleased that the Parker family had produced another daughter who was making a sensible choice. People praised David for his loyalty and Cherry for her wisdom. The gossip about Jane died down as everyone focused on the upcoming wedding. But Cherry's happiness was complicated by the knowledge that this marriage was built on a foundation of convenience rather than love. She tried to push aside her doubts and focus on planning the wedding, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. She was marrying the man of her dreams, but not in the way she had dreamed of. The wedding took place on a sunny Saturday in June, exactly 3 months after David's proposal. Cherry wore her grandmother's dress, which Martha had altered to fit her smaller frame. The ceremony was beautiful, held in the same church where Cherry had attended services her entire life. Everyone in the community came to witness the union of 2 respected families, and on the surface, everything looked perfect. But Cherry could feel the hollowness beneath the celebration. David was polite and attentive during the ceremony, but she could see the sadness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. He was going through the motions of being a happy groom, but his heart wasn't in it. When he kissed her at the altar, it felt more like a handshake than a romantic gesture. The reception was held at the community center, with Martha's famous pot roast and Cherry's favorite chocolate cake. People danced and laughed and offered congratulations, but Cherry felt like she was watching it all from outside her own body. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but instead, she felt like she was attending someone else's wedding. The most painful moment came when David's best man, Tom, gave a speech about how David had found his perfect match. Tom talked about how David had been waiting for the right woman to come along, someone who would appreciate him and make him truly happy. Cherry knew that Tom meant well, but every word felt like a knife in her heart because she knew that she wasn't David's perfect match. She was his consolation prize. After the reception, David and Cherry went to a hotel for their wedding night. Cherry had been dreading this moment for weeks, not because she didn't want to be intimate with David, but because she was terrified that he would be thinking about Jane. She was afraid that he would close his eyes and pretend she was someone else, that their first night as husband and wife would be a lie. Her fears were justified. David was gentle and respectful, but there was no passion, no excitement, no sense that this was a moment he had been looking forward to. He treated her like a fragile object that he was afraid of breaking, and when it was over, he rolled away from her and went to sleep without saying a word. Cherry lay awake for hours, listening to her new husband's breathing and wondering what she had gotten herself into. She had married the man she loved, but she had never felt more alone in her life. The first few months of marriage were a lesson in loneliness. David was a good husband in all the practical ways. He worked hard, brought home a steady paycheck, and never forgot to take out the trash or mow the lawn. He was polite to Cherry's parents, remembered her birthday, and never raised his voice or treated her badly. But he was emotionally absent in ways that made Cherry feel like she was living with a stranger. David had moved them into a nice house in a good neighborhood, and Cherry threw herself into making it a home. She decorated the rooms, planted a garden, and learned to cook David's favorite meals. She thought that maybe if she could create the perfect domestic environment, David would start to see her as more than just a convenient wife. But David remained distant. He would come home from work, eat dinner, watch television, and go to bed. He was polite during their conversations, but he never shared his thoughts or feelings with her. He never asked about her day, or her dreams, or her hopes for their future together. He treated her like a roommate rather than a wife, and Cherry began to feel like she was disappearing. The worst part was that Cherry could tell David was still thinking about Jane. He would sometimes stop mid-sentence when he was talking to her, as if he had forgotten who he was talking to. He kept a photo of Jane on his desk at work, claiming it was an old family photo, but Cherry knew better. He would get a distant look in his eyes sometimes, and Cherry knew he was wondering what Jane was doing in Australia. 8 months into their marriage, Cherry discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling sick for weeks, but she had attributed it to stress and unhappiness. When the doctor confirmed her pregnancy, Cherry felt a mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but she had imagined having them with a husband who loved her. Cherry was nervous about telling David the news. She hoped that maybe the prospect of becoming a father would bring them closer together, that it would give him something to be excited about. She planned a special dinner and waited for the perfect moment to share her news. "David, I have something important to tell you," she said as they were finishing their meal. David looked up from his plate with a polite but uninterested expression. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant," Cherry said, her voice barely above a whisper. David's face went completely white. He stared at her for a long moment, and then he set down his fork with a sharp clink. "That's impossible," he said coldly. "What do you mean it's impossible?" Cherry asked, confused by his reaction. "I mean it's impossible because I had a vasectomy 2 years ago," David said, his voice getting louder. "I had it done before Jane left because we didn't want children right away. So either you're lying about being pregnant, or you're lying about who the father is." Cherry felt like she had been slapped. "David, I would never lie about something like this. And I would never cheat on you. I love you." "Don't," David said, standing up from the table. "Don't say that. We both know this marriage isn't about love. It's about convenience and reputation. But I never thought you would try to trap me with someone else's baby." "It's not someone else's baby," Cherry said, tears streaming down her face. "It's your baby. Maybe the vasectomy didn't work. Maybe something went wrong. These things happen." David laughed bitterly. "Nothing went wrong, Cherry. I know what I did and why I did it. I'm not stupid enough to believe that vasectomies just magically reverse themselves. Then go to the doctor and find out, Cherry said desperately. Get tested. Prove that it's not possible. I don't need to prove anything, David said. I know what I know. And what I know is that I can't stay married to someone who would lie to me about something this important. David left the house that night and didn't come back for 3 days. When he finally returned, he was cold and distant in ways that made their previous relationship seem warm and intimate by comparison. He moved into the guest bedroom and barely spoke to Cherry except when absolutely necessary. Cherry was devastated. She had been prepared for David not to love her, but she had never expected him to accuse her of cheating and lying. She had never expected him to abandon her when she needed him most. She went to her own doctor and asked for every test possible to prove that the baby was David's, but David refused to look at the results. The pregnancy became a source of constant tension between them. David would come home, eat dinner in silence, and disappear into his room. He stopped introducing Cherry as his wife when they were in public, referring to her instead as Cherry Parker, as if she had never taken his name. He made it clear to everyone who would listen that he was being forced to deal with a situation that wasn't his fault. Cherry's parents were confused and hurt by David's behavior. They had expected him to be thrilled about becoming a father, and they couldn't understand why he was treating Cherry so poorly. When Cherry tried to explain about the vasectomy, her parents suggested that maybe David was confused or mistaken. They encouraged her to be patient and understanding, to give him time to adjust to the news. But Cherry was running out of patience and hope. She was pregnant, alone, and married to a man who despised her. She had sacrificed her dreams of a loving marriage for the sake of her family's reputation, and now she was trapped in a situation that was worse than being alone. It was during this dark period that Cherry encountered Simon Fletcher, David's business rival and the man who would eventually become her salvation. Simon worked for a competing firm, and he had a reputation for being charming, successful, and slightly dangerous. He was everything that David was not: passionate, impulsive, and willing to fight for what he wanted. Cherry first met Simon at a business function that she attended with David. She was 6 months pregnant and feeling enormous and unattractive, but Simon treated her with a kindness and respect that she hadn't experienced in months. He asked about her pregnancy with genuine interest, complimented her on how radiant she looked, and made her laugh for the first time in weeks. David was furious when he saw Simon talking to Cherry. He dragged her away from the conversation and spent the rest of the evening glaring at Simon across the room. On the drive home, David accused Cherry of flirting with Simon and embarrassing him in front of his colleagues. I wasn't flirting with anyone, Cherry said. I was just having a conversation with a nice man who treated me like a human being. Simon Fletcher is not a nice man, David said. He's a snake who would do anything to get ahead in business. And if you think he's interested in you for any reason other than to get at me, you're more naive than I thought. Cherry didn't argue with David, but she couldn't stop thinking about Simon. For the first time in months, someone had looked at her like she was worth talking to, like she was interesting and attractive despite her pregnancy. She found herself wondering what it would be like to be married to someone who actually wanted to spend time with her. 2 weeks after the business function, Cherry was shopping for baby clothes when she ran into Simon at the mall. He was carrying shopping bags and looked genuinely happy to see her. This time, there was no David to drag her away from the conversation, no one to make her feel guilty for enjoying someone's company. Cherry, how are you feeling? Simon asked, his eyes warm with genuine concern. You look wonderful. For the first time in months, Cherry felt seen. Simon remembered her name, asked about her well-being, and looked at her like she was a person worth caring about. They talked for 20 minutes about everything and nothing. Simon told her about his work, asked about her pregnancy, and made her laugh with stories about his own family. When it was time to leave, he gave her his business card. If you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call me, he said. I mean that, Cherry. No one should have to go through pregnancy alone. Cherry kept Simon's card in her purse, but she didn't call him. She was still married to David, still hoping that somehow things would get better between them. She was still the dutiful wife who didn't make waves or cause problems. But she thought about Simon's kindness every day, especially when David came home and treated her like she was invisible. The breaking point came 2 months later, when Cherry was 8 months pregnant and could barely move without discomfort. She had been experiencing false labor pains all day, and by evening,